Good evening, and welcome to those of you watching tonight, and welcome to our panelists. I'm Erica Nelson, a co-president of the League of Women Voters of Glen, Ellyn, along with Kristen Malone. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization working to increase understanding of major public policy issues through education and advocacy. This forum is hosted by a coalition of 10 leagues within the 6th Congressional District. Thank you for joining us for this candidate forum for the 6th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. Tonight, we will be hearing from the incumbent candidate Sean Casten, candidate Jeanne Ives, and candidate Bill Redpath. Our moderator tonight is Jeanne Dorner. Jeanne is a member of the Elmhurst League of Women Voters and a League of Women Voter Illinois trained moderator. She serves on the LWVIL State Board as a Vice President for Voter Services. Jeanne lives in the 5th Congressional District. Welcome, Jeanne.
Thank you, Erica. This forum is between the League of Women Voters' purpose is to promote political responsibility through the informed and active participation of citizens in government. Providing this forum allows citizens to become better informed about the issues facing their community and to become better acquainted with the candidates running for office. We are happy to provide this service for the community. Questions have been collected from our members and the community before this forum and were screened for duplication, clarity, and appropriateness to the office being discussed. This forum is between the 3 candidates seeking to represent the 6th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. This forum is being recorded by the League and we claim all copyright ownership. The candidates have agreed to abide by the rules set forth prior to this forum. They will each present a 2-minute introductory statement. The order to start is alphabetical. Then questions will be asked and each candidate will have up to 90 seconds to respond in alternating order. Closing statements will be 2 minutes as well. There will be timer slides on the screen and I will ask you to adhere to these time limits. When you see the stop slide, you may finish your sentence, but we ask you to conclude. Candidates, can you please start your video and audio?
The host stopped my video.
Yeah, if you can hear me, it says the host has stopped my video. I've got the audio, but I think we need someone on, oh, there we go. There we go.
I have the same situation. You've stopped my video. Okay, got it.
Okay, so now that we started out with an exciting beginning here, Sean Casten, would you please start with your opening statement?
It's my privilege to represent the 6th District. I never planned on running for office. I spent 20 years in the private sector as an entrepreneur building over 80 clean energy projects. I decided to run after Donald Trump won in 2016 because I couldn't stomach the thought of a government that would politicize science, that would distort free markets in support of crony capitalism, that would take away your health care, that would celebrate hatred. I was sworn into office during the longest shutdown in our history caused by a temper tantrum about a wall. We impeached the president after he put his personal interests over the security of our allies, and we are now fighting an economic and public health crisis that is disproportionately borne by the poor, the hungry, the meek, and the persecuted. After all that, my opponent gives Donald Trump an A grade. She denies that man-made climate change is real. She supports the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, and she supports the 2017 tax law that blew a hole in our budget. By contrast, I played a central role in the climate crisis report, which has been called the most serious and sophisticated climate policy to ever come out of Congress. I've fought to defend and expand the ACA to lower prescription drug costs, and I've passed legislation on the floor to restore the SALT deduction that the 2017 tax law eliminated. That record is why I've been endorsed by Democratic leaders like Barack Obama and mainstream Republican leaders like former Illinois GOP Chairman Pat Brady. And I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because the people who I have the privilege to represent are unabashedly pro-science, pro-choice, pro-equality, pro-market, pro-democracy. They know that those values should never be partisan. And I know this because they told me in my 40 town halls or when I marched with them for women, for science, for our lives, and for Black Lives Matter. Trump may have taken us backwards, but he didn't destroy our values, and we're going to prove that on November 3rd. Thank you.
Jeanne Ives, will you please give your opening statement?
Yes, thank you. In my lifetime, I have never seen the country more unsettled. The 2020 election will decide the direction of our nation for years to come. The choice is simple. Do you believe more government and taxes will solve what ails America? Or do you believe in our American principles of free enterprise and the rule of law as the best way to move forward? I'm Jeanne Ives. I'm a West Point grad, a mother of 5, and a military mom. When I look at the issues facing our nation, I know the solution rests more in the individual than in government. For decades, we have voluntarily come together in our local communities to create vibrant places to raise a family and grow a business. Now, big government policies pose an even greater threat to our freedom. It will take men and women of character who have an understanding of government's proper role in society to get America on track. When Sean Casten looks at the challenges our nation faces, he believes more government control and higher taxes are the solution. His plans for more government involvement in every aspect of our lives would destroy our energy independence and private health insurance and create more mandates on our schools. He doesn't trust you to make decisions for your life. He trusts the government to. Additionally, we only need to look at Congressman Casten's public comments and Twitter rants to know what he really thinks about half of his constituents and his colleagues on the other side of the aisle. He has called House Republicans Nazi sympathizers, mocked Senator Rubio for tweeting out a Bible verse, said bipartisanship is overrated and what the voter thinks does not matter. He made national news for rapping that people who disagree with him are loony, racist, and science deniers. It is no wonder he has failed to get any legislation passed despite being in the majority. In contrast, as a state legislator, I served in the minority and I worked with Democrats to expand healthcare access, pass property tax reform, protect condos owners, and reform higher education contracts. I opposed both parties on unbalanced budgets and tax hikes and stood up against the ComEd Exelon bailout. We have big challenges ahead. It will take leaders of character to work with others to restore law and order, get our kids back in school, and get our economy growing again while taking care of our most vulnerable citizens. Americans can do it. I'm Jeanne Ives, and I'm asking for your vote.
Thank you. Bill Redpath, would you please give your opening statement?
Yes, I'm Bill Redpath, Libertarian Party candidate for U.S. House in Illinois' 6th Congressional District this year. I was born and raised in Findlay, Ohio. I earned a bachelor's degree in economic and political science from Indiana University in Bloomington in 1978 and an MBA from the University of Chicago in 1980. I moved from the Washington, D.C. metro area to Illinois last October. I've been asked many times why I moved to Illinois when more moving vans are headed in the opposite direction. I'm engaged to Julie Fox, former Libertarian candidate for Comptroller of Illinois, so I guess love conquers all. I'm currently a managing director with Summit Ridge Group, LLC, in its Chicago office. I do business valuation and financial consulting work, along with some machinery and equipment appraisal work in the media, telecom, and satellite sectors. Previously, I was employed by Arthur Anderson and Company in Cincinnati, WISH-TV in Indianapolis, ABC and NBC in New York, and for 34 years with BIA Advisory Services in Chantilly, Virginia. I'm a certified public accountant with a Virginia license and a chartered financial analyst. I've earned business valuation designations from the American Society of Appraisers and the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. I also earned the Certificate in Investment Performance Measurement designation from the CFA Institute. I've been a Libertarian Party member since 1984. I was national chairman from 2006 to 2010, and I served a total of 21 years on the Libertarian National Committee. I'm most well known within the party for my work on ballot access. For the past 30 years, I've headed the national ballot access efforts of the Libertarian Party, during which time the LP has placed a presidential ticket on the ballot in all 50 states and DC in 5 of 8 presidential elections. The previous 6 times that I ran for office were in Virginia, including governor in 2001, U.S. Senate in 2008, and U.S. House in Virginia's 10th district in 2010 and 2014. Again, I'm Bill Redpath, Libertarian for U.S. House in Illinois' 6th District. You'll learn more of my stands on issues as we go through the questions, and I respectfully ask for your vote in the 6th CD in Illinois this year. Thank you.
Thank you. The first question goes to candidate Ives. What level of engagement with our allies and the global community should the U.S. maintain with respect to international treaties, governing organizations, and relief efforts?
Well, as you know, the United States is a very generous nation. We have spent a good amount of our treasure protecting nations from across the world. And unfortunately, we've lost a good number of our men and women who have fought to maintain freedom with our allies. We need to keep those strong alliances going. And so I support completely a shared responsibility as we go forward. Now, I think it's pretty remarkable that President Trump has been able to bring peace to the Middle East with the current signing of the peace accord between Bahrain and Israel, as well as the UAE and Israel. That is a marked accomplishment that we should all take note of. These will soon be greater allies in the future as well. There is obviously a huge threat through the Chinese Communist Party that which chooses to extend its influence into all sorts of other nations, has made incursions into the South China Seas, and these only way that we can hold them in abeyance and hold them accountable for the human rights violations is to work with our allies in the region to strengthen our resolve against the Chinese Communist Party and their expansionist ideas. So it's going to take a whole network of people that trust each other to make this happen, and I fully support that. I also support the new trade agreements that President Trump was able to negotiate as well with our partners to the north and south.
Thank you. Candidate Redpath, same question.
I think we are clearly overextended militarily around the world. We need our allies to pick up more of the freight, more of the tab in defending themselves. We need to insist that our allies in Europe live up to their guarantee of spending at least 2% of their GDP on the military. We are involved in Korea to much too much of an extent. We're there, it's a tripwire really regarding a possible conflict with North Korea, which could be a catastrophic event, not just for South Korea and the innocent people in North Korea, but also possibly for the United States. We should, I think, let people know that I don't think we should go to war for Taiwan if it comes to it. We ought to let our allies know that. We need to be realistic in what we can do. We can't go on spending this nation into oblivion. The national debt, we've had James Mattis, former Secretary of Defense, talk about the fact that the national debt is a national security problem. It's mounting. There have been reports coming out just today and last week from the Congressional Budget Office. If this continues to pile up the national debt, it will be a defense problem for this nation, a national security problem for this nation. We need our allies to do more. We should not expand NATO, and overall, we should have some restraint in our foreign policy.
Thank you. Candidate Casten, what level of engagement with our allies in the global community should we engage in?
So when I went to Madrid to represent the United States as part of the delegation to the climate conference, one of the European parliamentarians pulled me aside and he said, you know, when the US doesn't lead, bad things happen. Now, he was talking about that in the context of the United States pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. But I've heard the same thing from some of our allies talking about the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. When we don't lead, bad things happen. There are other countries like China, like Russia, who would like nothing better than for us to pull back. And as Donald Trump has pulled back from NATO, has pulled us out of those agreements, has clung to this idea of sovereignty, that anything that we do that involves multilateral agreements somehow diminishes our stature. What he has effectively done is increase the power of those countries that don't share our values. That conversation I had in Madrid, they said there is no country that has the economic and military might of the United States and has your moral clout. So I want us to be the preeminent world power. We voted for the largest defense bill ever, but we also need to have the largest diplomatic bill ever. And with that great power comes great responsibility. The post-World War II order has maintained peace for 70 years, and it is our obligation to make sure it continues.
Thank you. Bill Redpath, what are your priorities to address climate change? Do you endorse rejoining the Paris Climate Accord?
No, I do not. I think that climate change is, first of all, yes, there is some global warming. It probably is to a certain extent man-generated, but early in the 20th century, there was global warming. Then there was a cooling period sort of in the middle of the 20th century, and now we've entered a warming period again. So it's not at all clear how much of this is caused by human activity. I think that we're going to have a slightly warmer world. I mean, many more people have died because of cold weather than warm weather. We can adjust to this. We've been adjusting to it. We need to address this issue, but it is a problem. It is not a crisis. And through incremental means and ends, we can do the best without going to something like the Green New Deal, which would be catastrophic for the economy, in my opinion. I think that grand plans are not needed. We simply need to continue to work incrementally on this problem so we don't harm the economy and we do the best we can for the environment and the temperature and through climate change.
Thank you. Sean Casten, same question.
The science is totally settled. This is the challenge of our lifetime, and our grandchildren are going to judge us by whether we stepped up. The problem is we have framed this entirely the wrong way. There has been this rhetoric that somehow, how will we possibly allocate the pain of this transition? And the reality is that we have an amazing gain that needs to be allocated. I know this because I built 80 clean energy projects. Every single one of them lowered the cost of energy. What we have to do is threefold. Number one, we have to double the efficiency of the US economy, which would take us to the efficiency of many of our trading partners like Switzerland and Japan. So that's not technologically problematic. And anything we do to increase our GDP per unit of energy leaves more money in our pocket. The second thing we have to do is we have to invest in a massive R&D program to figure out how to decarbonize hard to decarbonize industries. We don't know how to make fertilizer, how to make steel, how to make cement how to make silicon without fossil fuel. That's a chemical problem. And we need the R&D to do that. I led and got through the Clean Industrial Technology Act to stand up an agency in the Department of Energy to do that. If we do those things, we will create tremendous wealth. We will create tremendous innovation, and we're going to need it. Because the third thing we have to do is get back to 1985 atmospheric CO2 levels, and that's going to be hard. When I was born, the atmospheric CO2 concentration was 330 parts per million, roughly where it had been for the prior 10,000 years. It is now 420. The West is on fire. This is the fastest year ever to an S-named storm. We have got to step up in this moment.
Thank you. Jeanne Ives, what are your priorities to address climate change?
Well, it's certainly not spending $16 trillion on a Green New Deal, which is something that Sean Casten has actually suggested. It is about doing it in a reasonable manner. Listen, the climate changes. It was hotter 20,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And you know, but here's the deal. You just heard Congressman Casten tell you that you cannot actually pour cement without fossil fuels. That's true. And it takes 100 loads of cement 25 feet down for a wind turbine. So if he likes wind, then he's going to have to like cement, and we have not figured that out yet. Thankfully, right here in the 6th Congressional District area, we have 2 national laboratories that are working to help make a difference in this area and are doing studies about that. That's the path that we need to take forward. I am open to suggestions on this, by the way, but I'm not open to subsidizing energy industries that have failed time and time again. And here's the big thing. Sean Casten's not open to other people's ideas. When Michael Schellenberg was invited in front of his climate caucus or committee, he basically shut him down. And in fact, in a Quillette article, Michael Schellenberger said, I was invited to testify on energy policy, then Democrats didn't let me speak. He said, Representative Sean Casten of Illinois and Jared Huffman of California, both Democrats, used their whole allotted time to claim that I'm not a real environmentalist and that I'm not a qualified expert and that I'm motivated by money. Had I been given the chance to respond, he says, I would have known that I've been a climate activist for 20 years. My new book, Apocalypse Never, has received strong praise from leading environmental scientists and scholars.
Thank you.
The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change recently invited me to serve as an expert reviewer, but I was not given any chance to say any of that because they shut me down.
Your time is up. Thank you. Candidate Casten, what are you doing to educate yourself about systemic racism and what can be done to eliminate it from our culture and legal system?
So the last caucus meeting I was in with John Lewis, it was just after George Floyd was murdered. And John came on the call and he said, I thought we were done with this. And we all paused because John was not a negative guy. And then he said, but I've never been more optimistic than I am at this moment. Because in 1962, 60% of the country opposed the Freedom Rides. And 75% of the country today supported the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, I marched with 3,000 people in Wheaton, 4,000 people in Downers Grove, 1,000 people in Barrington. And that's not to say we're done by a long stretch, but we're finally having the conversation. When I was down with Mr. Lewis and Selma and Brian Stevenson, Brian, the author of Just Mercy, was with us, and he pointed out that the original sin of our country wasn't slavery, it was the narrative of inequality. Because you can't enslave a man, you can't beat a man, you can't rape his wife unless you first convince yourself that he's unequal. And we haven't really gotten beyond that yet. When you hear people talking about riots in our cities, they're fulfilling that narrative that we're unequal. When you hear people saying that affirmative action is a problem, they're fulfilling that narrative that we're unequal, but we're starting to talk about it. We got a long way to go, but the conversation has started. And I'm so encouraged by the youth who are standing up and rising up, showing true empathy for people who don't share their experience of the color of their skin.
Thank you. Candidate Ives.
Listen, the only way that America is going to get past this idea of systemic racism is to really have equality under the law. That is fundamental to what we believe as Americans. It is right there in front of us in our US Constitution. Everybody is to be treated equally. And when we treat people equally, then we're not going to have systemic racism. That is the case. And it's quite unfortunate that people are not being treated equally. The rioting, the looting, the Kenosha incident, people not arrested, people not given an opportunity in Chicago public schools that are majority minority to actually have a good education, where they only educate 25% that read or do math at grade level. I think that's where we need to work on. We need better opportunities in the education field. But first and foremost, Americans should deserve to be treated equally under the law. We cannot have people coming up to diners outside and tipping the tables over and then demanding them that they raise their fist. That's not equal. That's not a good path to be on either. Everybody needs to be treated equally. That's what our law says. That's what I will abide by. And only then, when you have equal treatment under the law, which is already guaranteed in our Constitution and must be enforced by everybody, will we then get to the point where we can all feel like we have the same opportunities in this country.
Thank you. Candidate Redpath.
Well, first of all, I do not think we have a racist society. I mean, we have bumps in the road getting to a fully colorblind society, there are specific things that need to be done, but we are in a far better place than we were, say, 60 years ago. I mean, you go back, I read a book on Virginia history about politics in Virginia, and what members of the Virginia General Assembly were saying on racial matters 60 years ago is truly shocking. You look at that, you got to realize we're in a far better place today than we were then. But what else can we do? We need to end qualified immunity, first of all, for the police, or greatly reform it. The situation where they can do most anything they want and then not be subject to some sort of punishment through civil lawsuit or something along those lines is ridiculous. We need to end or greatly reform qualified immunity. We need to end the war on drugs. Do you think there's any chance we have had the violence we've had in this society for the past several decades, and particularly since Memorial Day 2020, if there hadn't been an insane war on drugs in this nation that has particularly targeted minority communities? And then occupational licensing. We need to create more occupational education, occupational opportunities. We need to reform the education system and have more school choice, yes, but occupational licensing, we've gone from 50 years ago, 5% of all occupations being licensed to 30% today. We need to reform that and give minorities much greater economic opportunity thereby.
Thank you. Jeanne Ives. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in millions of jobs lost and business failures. Has this changed your thinking on the viability of employment-based health insurance or some form of universally available health insurance?
Listen, we've learned a lot in the COVID-19 crisis. I'll be honest with you, our healthcare system was able to ramp up. Our manufacturers were able to start producing PPE that we needed. And our pharmaceutical companies are working on a rapid vaccine. So it's been an amazing effort. Now, it is tragic that we have had shutdown of businesses and people out of work. And what we do know foremost is that people get, especially in the Illinois 6th District, a lot of people get their insurance from work. So businesses that are out of work, that is a problem for people who don't have health care either. The way to do this is to actually ramp up more businesses. That's what we need to do. We need to open up the economy so that people can get back to work and get that same health care coverage that they're used to getting from their employer. There's been nothing more beneficial than getting it that way. In the meantime, though, the way to solve the health crisis is not to go to universal health care. We've already seen what happens when you do that with a very small segment of the population, the Veterans Association. So that is not the way to go. We need more options in healthcare. I've endorsed the Republican Study Committee that says that you get to come together in associations and buy cheaper plans, that you get to use health savings accounts to take care of your premiums and your deductibles tax-free, that you get more options by buying across state lines. Look, when Obamacare hit, we lost 14 insurance companies that used to operate on the independent market, and we only have 3 left.
Thank you. Bill Redpath, same question.
First of all, I think it makes no sense to have to get your health insurance through your employer. This is a vestige of World War II when wages were frozen and they began competing for employees through incremental benefits. We don't get our auto insurance. We don't get our homeowners insurance. We don't get other forms of insurance through our employer, but we get health insurance through our employer. That situation needs to change, first of all. We need to eliminate tax preferences on healthcare to, again, cut the link between health insurance and employment. We need to move toward a system where people are paying more of their low-level healthcare expenditures. We need greater health savings accounts. We need to move to a system where people contribute to their health savings accounts to pay for small dollar items and then purchase catastrophic insurance and return insurance to a real insurance role in our healthcare system instead of paying for nearly all of our healthcare. And we need to allow licensing. Congress should mandate that states accept the healthcare licenses of other states. We need to stimulate more health care supply in this nation. And we also have, frankly, a bureaucratic healthcare system. I've had some occasion over the past couple of months to get a taste of that. And I don't think bringing government more into healthcare is the way to go. We need a vibrant, dynamic healthcare sector. More government is not the answer.
Thank you. Sean Casten, your answer?
So we have both a moral obligation and an economic incentive to get to universal healthcare as quick as I can. But we've got to separate these things. Government provided healthcare is not the same as universal healthcare. Single payer is not the same as universal healthcare. Every single country that has universal healthcare spends less than we do per capita on healthcare. The average American, we spend about $10,000 per year on healthcare. Every country with universal healthcare spends $7,000 or less. Every one of those countries also has better health outcomes than we do. And the reasons for that are not really all that surprising. If you can go and get a preventative checkup, you don't have to pay for expensive services on the back end. And what we've seen in the COVID crisis is the costs of COVID has been disproportionately borne by people who don't currently have health care. Now, to your question about employee-provided care, what we have evolved over time is a very patchwork system in this country. If you're old enough, you get Medicare. If you're poor enough, you get Medicaid. If you're a veteran, you get the VA. If you're a Native American, you may have access through the BIA. And if you have an employee-provided plan, you have that. There are gaps of people who are not covered. What the ACA tried to do was to close those gaps. It didn't get it all the way, but it got 20 million Americans more health insurance that didn't have it before. It was starting to bend the curve. The countries that have the best health outcomes still maintain competition and choice in the system. Countries like Switzerland, they have half the mortality amenable to healthcare as we do, but you don't get there with this health savings account plan if only because the average American, the median family has $60,000 a year in income. Telling that person to set aside $10,000 in taxes in a health savings account is not healthcare.
Thank you. Candidate Redpath, do you support universal background checks to reduce gun violence? Do you support the restoration of the assault weapons ban?
No to the assault weapons ban. I think that's basically cosmetic in nature. So the answer to that is no. I would say that I do think there should be background checks on purchases of weapons. I disagree with some of my fellow libertarians on that, but I think whatever policies we have, we should maximize negative rights in this nation, being the right to life, the right to liberty. I think that in those situations, we should do what is necessary to affect that. But many of these laws are very costly and not effective. And I think that before any more gun legislation is passed, there has to be a solid justification for it in terms of, again, maximizing lives saved and negative rights in our society. And that is a pretty tall order, but I think that is necessary, again, to maximize life, liberty, and the defense of property in this nation.
Thank you. Candidate Casten?
I absolutely support universal background checks, absolutely support an assault weapons ban. I introduced legislation, the Gun Trafficker Detection Act, to make people criminally liable if they can't keep track of their gun, because the overwhelming majority of the gun crimes in Chicago are done by guns that come in from out of state. But if we do all of that, we still have not confronted the fact that we have too many guns. There's a narrative that the NRA has completely corrupted in our politics of this whole guns don't kill people, people don't kill people. Well, the majority of gun deaths in this country are by suicide. Who exactly are you blaming? We don't have a higher rate of suicide attempt in this country. We don't have a higher rate of mental health in this country, but we have a much higher success rate because we give people access to deadly weapons. Little fun fact, depressingly fun fact. If we took away 100 million guns from America, we would still have the highest gun ownership per capita in the world. We'd have to take away almost 120 million to get to the level that Serbia has achieved. We'd have to take away almost 170 million to get to the level of Yemen. Nobody would suggest that Yemen is not honoring people's Second Amendment right to a gun. But we have gone completely gun crazy in this country. And until we're ready to have that conversation, I'm still going to have to wonder when my daughters go to school what their lockdown drill will be like today.
Thank you. Candidate Ives?
Well, it's a pretty interesting conversation here, because the one thing that people have glaringly left out is the fact that we're not actually enforcing the gun laws we currently have on the books. We have universal background checks. We absolutely do have those. But I will remind you that, you know what? Here's the headline: repeat gun offender, free on bail for gun possession, is charged with murdering teen in a drive-by. Why? Because Kim Foxx, the Democrat state's attorney in Cook County, let him out. We don't enforce our gun laws right now. There's no way that if you added one more universal background check on a man like this, that this doesn't happen. What we need is a return to the Exile Project, which Senator Tim Kaine put in place in Virginia, in Richmond, in the late 90s. And that said, basically, you get caught with an illegal gun, we don't care what the circumstances are, you're going to prison, in a federal prison, for 5 years. That dramatically decreased gun felons. We don't, you know, once we start enforcing the laws we have on the book, then you can look to other alternatives. But the truth is we do extensive background checks on people. Unfortunately, what we need to do is we need to tighten up that system. The Aurora shooter got let out because that system was not tight enough. The reporting was not there. Let's work on the rules that we have right now and put these people, these gang members, off the street for good.
Thank you. Sean Casten, during the current COVID-19 crisis, the federal government has increased deficit spending while millions of job losses cut into tax revenues. How should the Congress weigh the current critical needs against the spiraling national debt?
So one of the things that in my In my entrepreneur days, I used to always tell our young employees, when you bring an investment opportunity to me, I want to see the Mother Nature return. I want to see how much the total cost is to everybody, the total gain to everybody, and what we're bearing. We need to talk about the federal budget in the same way. We've spent almost an obscene amount of money, $3 trillion. But what would have happened if we didn't spend that money, right? We've helped thousands of small businesses in this district who would have shut down if we didn't get them PPP loans. We got economic impact payments to people, unemployment insurance. We got money to hospitals that were going to shut down because they didn't have any way to keep running. Not because they were shut down, but because if people don't feel safe to go to work, that they can't keep people sick, the economy is shut down. And so we have to be responsible about where we spend that money, obviously. But we have to recognize that when we are in a massive global economic downturn, when we are one of the few people in the world who has the ability to borrow at effectively zero or negative interest rates, inflation adjusted, then it's the right thing to do to borrow money at low rates to ensure a faster rate of growth in the future. It's, in a business context, you'd call that levering your equity. We need to do that in this moment. We need to be responsible, but this is absolutely no time. You know, when Eisenhower was storming the beaches at D-Day, he didn't say, let's first bring half our troops home to pay for this. We're in a global pandemic. We have to deal with it at that level.
Thank you. Jeanne Ives, how should the Congress weigh the current critical needs against the spiraling national debt?
Well, we need budget caps and we need deficit reduction using the penny plan, which takes a 1% swipe every year for the next 5 years to get rid of the deficit that you had pre-COVID. But Sean Casten doesn't believe that. His first vote in 2019 was to actually end the budget caps that were in place. So he can't talk to you about fiscal responsibility because he has none. On top of it, during the COVID crisis, when the $2.2 trillion was being debated, Sean Casten did not ask for relief for small businesses or for the unemployed. He wrote a letter to Nancy Pelosi and asked for renewable energy subsidies that had nothing to do with COVID relief. That's what he asked for. And in that process, $150 billion was given out to states and localities to use as they saw fit. And guess what? Illinois got the lowest amount. Wyoming got over $2,100. We got less than $390 per person. Sean Casten and Congressman Foster came back a month later and they said, hey, we didn't get our fair share. And they asked for more. But when they had the opportunity at the end of May, they wanted to spend $3 trillion more. And then they wanted to bail out states and local governments to the tune of nearly $1 trillion. And they included all sorts of goodies. And they're like, let's bail out student loans at the same time, $10,000 a piece. He has no fiscal responsibility at all. And in COVID-19, we all came together, Democrat and Republican, to give people what they needed at the beginning. We can look forward to having an accounting of that first before we spend any more money on that. We need to open up our economy and get our kids back in school.
Bill Redpath.
We absolutely need to open up this economy. There's an article on Reason.com, Reason magazine, that says that the next pandemic will be a debt crisis and it's going to crush the economy. We need to encourage states to open up to get this economy moving again. If you want to see a different analysis regarding COVID, I would urge people to get on YouTube. There's a man by the name of Ivor Cummins, I believe is his last name, C-U-M-M-I-N-S. I believe Ivor is his first name. And he has an interesting take on COVID-19 and the relationship versus prior years where there were the analysis is of Europe and excess deaths in Europe 2 years ago and 10 years ago, where it was nearly as bad 2 years ago. And he says even worse 10 years ago, but there was no lockdown. But check out those videos for a different take on COVID-19 and also what's going on in South America with it. But we need to cut government spending. That's what we need to do. We need to make it so that unemployment benefits are not so generous that people don't want to work. There's been a lot of that going on. We need to wean people off of that. We need to start cutting government spending and get serious about it. And we need to do it quickly. We need to end the Department of Education. We need to abolish housing and urban development. We don't need those agencies. We should zero out corporate welfare. We should zero out farm subsidies. And that won't solve all our fiscal problems, but in a minute and a half, it's a pretty good start.
Thank you. Candidate Ives. How to improve our election process has become a hot topic. What are your thoughts on campaign finance reform as well as structural changes such as abolishing the Electoral College or using available technology to make voting easier?
Well, listen, you know, there's no way in the world I would vote for a bill called HR1, which Congressman Casten called his bravest vote. Now, in that legislation, it said that taxpayers should fund every congressional campaign up to $5 million. You want to talk about deficit reduction? That's the absolutely wrong way to go. Funding congressional campaigns, $5 million. And that was Congressman Casten's bravest vote he ever took. So that's the wrong thing. Let's remember, Sean Casten loaned his campaign of $630,000 to get elected. You know what? I'll answer the question the way I want to answer it. But here's the deal. Okay, we are not going to abolish the Electoral College. That is crazy. We need to protect states' rights as well. In doing so, our founders found a perfect way to do it. It also helps prevent against any fraud. So if you have a problem in one state with fraudulent voting happening, you're a little bit protected from federal elections at the presidential level from that interfering. It's a good system. It needs to stay in place. And this is something also that states have the preponderance of responsibility for. That's our elections. I don't look to federalize any aspect of that.
Thank you. Candidate Redpath.
I strongly support the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. I do not favor the Electoral College. I think it is absolutely ridiculous that somebody gets 2,868,686 more votes than someone else in a presidential election and doesn't get elected. We don't use it an Electoral College to elect anything else for any other offices in the nation. Why are we using it for president? It's a cockamamie system that is a vestige from the 18th century. I strongly favor the National Popular Vote Compact. As far as campaign finance reform goes, I think there ought to be widespread deregulation. It is very difficult, particularly in a minor party, to have to navigate Federal Election Commission laws and ballot access laws for that matter. The ballot access laws in Illinois are horrible, and I'm going to speak to that later on during my closing statement. We need real electoral reform, ranked choice voting, and we also need proportional representation in this nation. Frankly, we need to get away from single-member districts and go to multi-member districts, and I support the Fair Representation Act at Congress that would mandate multi-member districts in states that have more than one member in the U.S. House of Representatives, and mandate ranked choice voting for those states that have only one member in Congress.
Thank you. Candidate Casten.
I want to clarify what I said about HR 1. It's the bravest vote that Congress ever took. And the reason I say that is because our electoral system is overwhelmingly stacked in favor of incumbents. If you can decide how to gerrymander your district and pick your own voters, it's a really good way to keep your competitors out. Our public finance system, our campaign finance system is overwhelmingly stacked in favor of incumbents, because if you're a senior member of an exclusive committee, it's really easy to raise money. It's a lot harder for a challenger to raise money. By voting to get rid of gerrymandering, by voting to ensure public financing of elections, the members of Congress voted to make it easier for people like Mr. Redpath, like Ms. Ives, to win elected office. It's in your interest to do that. Now, as far as the cost of elections, it's obscene. But who would you rather have pay? Would you rather have the voters through our taxes pay for this, or would you rather the system right now where we know that the Russians were funneling money through the NRA and other groups to get into campaigns, where my predecessor advocated for a law that blocked your ability to know who was giving money to 501c3s, so we can't even trace where the money is coming from. That's not the way elections are supposed to work. Now, with respect to the Electoral College, there's a huge problem going on, particularly in Illinois, that as the population urbanizes, rural areas are way overrepresented. I represent about 740,000 people. I get one electoral vote. Wyoming has 500,000 people. They have one electoral vote, no 3 electoral votes, because they have 2 senators as well. If you want to prioritize Wyoming over Illinois, keep the Electoral College.
Thank you.
Trust democracy.
Thank you. Bill Redpath, What piece of the immigration system do you believe needs to be addressed most urgently?
All of it. It's a total mess. I mean, people are told to follow the law. The law is crazy. I mean, you wonder why you have an illegal immigration problem. It's because you can't tell someone to go get in line when there is no line. When an average person in Mexico has absolutely zero chance in the next quarter century to legally immigrate to the United States, no wonder people are crossing the border. You know, the way you take care of the illegal immigration problems to make more of it legal. I think that people should be able to immigrate to the United States, assuming they do not have a serious communicable illness, they don't have a criminal background, and they cannot reasonably be deemed a security threat. And if that is the case, then they ought to be able to come here. This nation would greatly benefit from it. I think there should be a short path to citizenship, but what is more important is work visas to allow agricultural workers to come here, to take caps, numeric caps off of various work visas to allow talented people from around the world to come here. Being an American is not about being born and raised here. It's about a state of mind. And if people are capable of that, coming here, working hard, being honest, being good citizens, they should be able to come here, and frankly, we need them.
Thank you. Sean Casten, what piece of the immigration system do you believe needs to be addressed most urgently?
So we are at our best when we are that shining city on a hill that Ronald Reagan described, where the best and brightest want to come. You can't address immigration independently of trade law and independently of labor law. And we have created a lot of our problems by separating those. The modifications we did to the USMCA in the House after Trump brought it to us got closer to that. And the reason I say that is because if you've got a factory in El Paso and one in Ciudad Juarez, the factory in El Paso has $8 minimum wage, the one in Ciudad Juarez has 80 cents. We have a labor law issue. If you decide as an American you want to have a manufactured in USA stamp, you have an incentive to employ undocumented folks. Our entire agriculture system suffers from that, where we depend on huge populations of undocumented because we haven't stapled those things together. The farm bill that we passed that provides a path to citizenship for roughly 2 million farm workers that our food system depends on, as long as they've not broken the law, is a step in the right direction. The DACA system is a step in the right direction, but we got to create a path to citizenship for folks who are doing what our forefathers did. They're coming here to build a better life. And we have to acknowledge the facts, which is that the majority of crimes in this country are done by native-born Americans. It takes a couple generations before folks start committing crimes at the level of native-born Americans. And we've got to respect those folks for doing like I said, what our forefathers did, and give them a path to get here legally and then raise a family here as we did.
Thank you. Jeanne Ives, same question.
Listen, I am pro-legal immigration, just like the rest of these folks are. You know, this is the nation of opportunity. It's a place that people look to get a good start in life. We understand that, but it must be legal, and that's the only way we can do it. So our immigration system is broken, and a lot of it is not just coming over the border. It is visa overstays. And so there's a real impetus here to actually understand what our force looks like, what our labor force looks like, what they need, what do businesses need to help this all happen. I mean, food processing in the state of Illinois is a big deal. You know, plants that process our beef and our hogs, that is intensely a lot of immigrant labor. Those who, you know, do harvest our fields, that is as well. We need that labor here, but we also are looking for those people that are enterprising and have the next good tech startup. We want them here as well. So we want a variety, but we have to come up with a formula that works for the citizens of the United States too, where they're respected as taxpayers as well, where the people coming over are able to actually make their way into the system and pay their own way. So there's a balance here that we need to address, but first and foremost, we have a broken visa system and we have porous borders. All of that needs to be tightened up.
Thank you. Candidate Casten, in many parts of the country, there is still limited access to crucial infrastructure like clean water, electricity, telephone service, and broadband internet connectivity. Is this a federal issue or strictly a state issue, and what can be done to make access universally available?
I think the answer is yes. It's all of the above. We have an interesting model here in Chicago. The electric industry, when it was first being set up, was a lot of independent competitors. George Westinghouse built a utility, and then he also built appliances that you could only use with electricity at the voltage he was generating. Thomas Edison did the same thing. And here in Chicago, Commonwealth Edison was founded by Samuel Insull, who basically made a deal and said, we are never going to electrify rural areas of the country unless we find some way to split this baby. And what he came up with, which is still the model today, is you give me a monopoly service territory in my region, give me an obligation to serve in that area, and then you can set my rates that have to be high enough to earn a return on capital. Is that capitalism or socialism? I don't know. It's a little bit of both, right? And that model electrified our country. I would submit to you that since that time, we have never really found a good way to build capital intensive utilities, low margin commodities, without some form of federal guarantees and then a lot of state involvement. So if we're going to get to full rural broadband, making sure that everybody has access to wireless as we should, the federal government's going to have to play a role, and local authorities are going to have to play a role in siting and making sure that that's done in a way that respects the local control in communities. But it's somewhere between a pro-market and a top-down model, because we've never found another way to do it, unfortunately.
Thank you. Candidate Ives, same question.
Well, infrastructure, of course, is a shared responsibility between the federal and the state government. But overwhelmingly, when you're talking about local projects and local utility companies and local broadband expansion, that is really a state requirement, any local requirement. It's not really a federal. The federal government is responsible for larger infrastructure projects or very expensive bridges that nearly no municipality can afford. I remember the Wheaton Bridge cost $18 million. Our share of it was about $2 million. We relied on federal funds to get that bridge over the railroad taken care of. But why was that our responsibility? Because it was a railroad utility as well. So it had a federal presence there. So, I mean, this is a shared responsibility. The problem is we have not prioritized our infrastructure needs, and we need to do that. Another national security consideration is the fact that much of our grid is run with sophisticated software, and it's, absolutely could be subject to cyber attacks. So we need to guard against that too. That's another concern when we talk about infrastructure as well. This is a shared responsibility again, but for the most part, states should take care of state requirements. The federal government should look broader across all of our land as to what we need to work on: levees and bridges and intermodal transportation ports.
Thank you. Candidate Redpath.
Yes, I think it should mainly be a state responsibility. There is no right to broadband in the US Constitution, nor is there any moral right to it. I think people need it, certainly, but good intentions are not enough. And I'll tell you what has happened in my professional practice. There are a lot of rural utilities out there that built broadband systems with a combination of grants and loans from the Rural Utility Service, which is a part of the Department of Agriculture. And what would happen is the federal government would come out and they would make it a 50% grant, 50% loan to these enterprises trying to bring broadband to rural America. Certainly a good thing, something to be admired. But the problem is this, that after the grant money is gone and spent, and now that business is trying to service their loan, they now have a business enterprise that is worth less than the amount due the Rural Utility Service. We can't go on like that. We have to be realistic about things. I think it should be a responsibility of, I don't think it should be a responsibility of government really at all, but if so, the local government. But this sort of situation, this was all a part of TARP back in 2009. This is a recipe for bankruptcy over the long run. We can't be giving away X dollars and having the result be a business that's worth 25% of X. That is the path to national bankruptcy. We can't do that anymore.
Thank you. So we're going to start with our closing statements, and Jeanne Ives will be first. You have 2 minutes.
No, oh, Jan, I am muted. Jan, we go till 8:30.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm gonna need to find a bunch more questions.
No, I have them all. Okay, this is Jeanne Ives first. In many,
Okay.
should contraception and abortion be covered by insurance? And do you support Roe v. Wade as settled law?
I do not accept Roe v. Wade as settled law. I think it's a state's requirement and it's something that should have been battled out at that point. On contraception, listen, private employers can decide what they want in their insurance company, in their insurance plans, and what they want to cover. That's the way to go. We have had a long-standing agreement, though, that with the Henry Hyde Amendment, the taxpayers should not have to fund abortion. And I stand firmly behind the Henry Hyde Agreement. Contraception is another different deal. But the fact that people like Sean Casten and his Democrat parties want you to believe what they believe and want to push people like the Little Sisters of the Poor to provide that type of product and that type of coverage in their insurance plans is not American. And it goes against every bit of the First Amendment and your religious rights. So I think that's the question that we're having here. Abortion, contraception, you can buy it, you can purchase it on, through an insurance plan or by yourself. That is not a problem with most individuals. But to force people to provide it is what's wrong. And that's the direction that Sean Casten wants to go. Because after all, the scientists that he said that, abortion is nothing more than a gallbladder surgery.
Bill Redpath, your answer to this question.
Well, first of all, I don't understand why contraception isn't sold over the counter. I mean, I think that would go a long way towards solving this problem. As far as coverage goes, I don't think there should be any government mandate. It should be something, the terms of employment on matters like this should be a private matter between employer and employee. And I also think that with respect to Roe v. Wade, I mean, every abortion is a tragedy and we should have 0 abortions, but I also think it is a tragedy for the government to get involved in a highly personal decision. I think Roe v. Wade was probably wrongly decided. I think it is a matter for the states and individuals to decide. If I were in the state legislature, I'd probably be voting largely pro-choice, but I do think that there is a point in a pregnancy, perhaps it's 20 weeks or so, but when the fetus would feel pain, I think it would not be unreasonable to say no abortions from that point on. I do not think abortion in this nation is going to be illegal in the foreseeable future, and I think some compromise to minimize the number of abortions in this nation should be worked out by the people of this nation.
Thank you. Sean Casten.
I am pro-choice in all cases without any exceptions. And that is not to say that any of us want to see any more abortions or, more specifically, any more unwanted pregnancies. But the choice about what is medically appropriate, what is appropriate for the woman's life, is the choice of that woman and that woman alone. With respect to contraception, I think we have gone down a very slippery slope of saying this should be subject to the religious views of the provider, because all you have to do is imagine a religion that you may personally disagree with to get into a really slippery slope. If you have a Jehovah's Witness doctor that's opposed to blood transfusions, should he deny you a blood transfusion if you're in the middle of a surgery? What we know statistically is that 1 in 4 women in this country will have an abortion before they turn 45. Since the announcement of Justice Ginsburg's passing, I have lost track of how many friends and family members have called me to tell me their own stories. That's what's on the ballot this election. That 1 in 4 number is true for Catholics and non-Catholics, red states and blue states, whether you have a Planned Parenthood clinic by you or not. The only thing that changes is whether or not that procedure is safe. When we do not give abortion services to people who depend on Medicaid, we put those women's lives in jeopardy. And the only way we reduce the incidence of unwanted pregnancy is by making sure that people have access to contraception.
Thank you. Candidate Redpath. Do you support redistricting reforms and fair map initiatives? How should the maps be drawn?
I absolutely do support redistricting reform. The map should be drawn with multi-member districts elected through ranked choice voting. There is no reason to think that we used to have cumulative voting in Illinois. Back 40 years ago or so, it was done away with, but it's my recollection we used to have 3-member districts, three people elected to the state house from each district in this state. And that's the way to go, I think. I mean, districting to a certain extent is gerrymandering regardless. Yes, there are fairer districts that can be drawn. There are absurd districts. The 6th Congressional District looks like a reverse question mark. There are there's a Congressional District in Chicago that looks like a C. But what we need to do, I think, we have an antiquated 18th century horse and buggy voting system called first past the post. And if we really want to reform, if we really want to get more effective choices, more voices in the election, in the elections in this nation, we need to fundamentally change the system away from single member legislative districts to multi-member districts, and use ranked choice voting in them and in single winner elections as well.
Thank you. Candidate Casten?
So yes, and as I mentioned, HR 1 that we passed would provide funding for every state to essentially get rid of gerrymandering. You really have to do that federally because it's not in any state's interest to unilaterally disarm. Whether you do that through creating some nonpartisan panel to create fair maps, whether you do that through a computer, there's lots of ways to do it, but the key is to take partisan decisions out of gerrymandering. I'll tell you just a quick story of how powerful this can be. I was an emerging leader in the Chicago Council of Global Affairs about a dozen years ago. And I sat on a panel of state legislatures talking about immigration policy. And one of the most thoughtful people there was a Republican state house member from Iowa. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, given what's going on in the country right now, your party is not known for being super forward thinking on immigration reform. How did you get to be so forward thinking? And he said, because in Iowa at the state house level, a computer draws our maps. Each party gets one black ball. If you don't like the map, you can throw in your black ball and then you got to live with the next one. And he said the result is that at the state level in Iowa, there's vastly less partisanship because every single person knows that they are going to have to appeal to something that looks like a representative sample of the electorate. I shouldn't be here right now. I won a race in a district that was gerrymandered to be safe, Republican forever. And yet here we are, but it shouldn't take a fluky wave election for that to happen. We should always have people who represent the majority of the values of the folks in a given region.
Thank you. Candidate Ives?
Well, the best person, the best cartographer in the entire state of Illinois is Mike Madigan. He certainly knows how to draw his voters into the districts that he wants to win. And that's exactly what he's been doing. Now, the 6th Congressional District, quite frankly, it has had a huge demographic shift as people flood out of Chicago and Cook County for beautiful, vibrant communities that have safe streets, wide open spaces, and lots of good schools. So there's always a demographic shift into good conservative areas that have been run fiscally responsibly. Now, that said, I support fair maps. No Democrats that I know supports fair maps. We put it on the ballot and only to have Mike, or try to put it on ballot, only to have Mike Madigan's personal lawyer, Mike Casper, run a lawsuit against it. Now, when I was a state rep and you had a gerrymandering problem in Wisconsin, which at that time was completely red, I actually signed on in support of a brief that went to the Supreme Court saying that I oppose gerrymandering wholesale everywhere. And that was the Democrats running that court case against the Republicans in Wisconsin. And I said, sign me up for that because I oppose gerrymandering. I also am supportive of term limits. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean Casten, what plan or plans do you support that will address the cost of higher education?
So one of the first bills that I wrote up when I got here, which I was glad to get in the Higher Education Act, is a bill that would permanently index Pell Grants to inflation. Because we've had tuition rising steadily, and yet the Pell Grants have stayed steady. So the out-of-pocket expense that people paid keeps growing up. And so by indexing it to inflation, we close that gap. That's a start. The really the bigger challenge that we have, though, is that over, our state schools, our land grant schools, the University of Illinois system, the model was initially that the state was going to provide most of that funding. And that kept college affordable for most folks. As state budgets across the country have really come under siege, and especially from Medicaid, interestingly enough, if we really got our healthcare costs under control, you'd have much more solvent state governments. If Illinois got the same amount of federal funding from Medicaid as Indiana does, Illinois wouldn't have a budget deficit. But what does that do in places like Illinois? It means you got less money for universities. So we can't change the fact in the foreseeable future that the cost of college education is just going to keep growing faster than the economy because it scales with an incremental unit of labor. But we can at least make sure that the scholarships you get try to keep up, and we can try to make sure that we do our part federally to minimize the out-of-cost payment that states have, that they have to divide among very, very scarce resources among very large sets of needs.
Thank you. Jeanne Ives.
College costs are out of control across the nation, and this does need a solution. However, Sean Casten's solution, as you heard, was more government spending, an increase in Pell Grants, no consideration for decreasing the costs. And as far as Illinois funding goes, we rank number 3 in the terms of state support to full-time equivalent students, number 3 across the nation. But it's just that half of that state support goes to pay pensions. In Illinois, the cost of college here is astronomical because of the cost of the pensions, and nobody has addressed that as a consideration. Additionally, we've had a 25% increase in administrative costs over the last 10 years. That's where a lot of your money's going to. When you have community college presidents in the state of Illinois making $500,000 in total compensation packets and then getting $735,000 buyout packages, that's part of the problem. It's a cost control issue as well. That's what the issue is. And it's not more federal government spending, by the way, and it's also taking student loans and taking them back to the private sector where they can make good decisions on the risk factors of that loan, of those loans. It's unfortunate that 41% of the students who enter college never complete with a degree, yet they enter with a lot of student loan debt. We need better services to mentor these folks into the right choices, and we need better consideration for the costs that are accumulating so that they can make wiser decisions.
Thank you. Bill Redpath.
There should not be government subsidization of higher education because it is a perverse redistribution of wealth from society as a whole to people who come from better off families and are going to earn higher incomes in the future because they're college graduates, or some of them are college graduates. Some of them don't make it through, but regardless, it is a system that should not be. Now, the loans and funding, so much in the way of loans and funding that have been available for students out there, that is what has driven tuition increases. The availability of this money, the colleges see what's coming. They have not been under pricing pressure to keep their increases at reasonable levels. That's why it's money pouring into higher education is what has allowed colleges to increase their tuition. Educational freedom is the answer. And that is a positive side, I think, of COVID-19, where I think it has stimulated more online learning. There's going to be greater competition. Colleges are going to have to show the value they bring to students in the future to a greater extent. A couple of other ideas with respect to student loans: maybe colleges should be the creditor. Maybe the government shouldn't be making the loans. Maybe colleges should be doing that and then collect from students in the future. That would straighten them up. And also equity investments, allowing people to make equity investments in students so they don't have to take student loans and they can get some earnings of the students for a few years when they go out into the world after finishing college.
Candidate Ives, what is your stand on providing coronavirus economic support to local and state governments?
This is a great conversation to have, and I already talked about it a little bit previously. But listen, in the $2.2 trillion bill that was passed in March, again, Sean Casten asked for renewable energy subsidies, not relief for constituents. And I went through those numbers because it's really important. Let's fast forward to the May bill that they passed, which was nearly $1 trillion to go to state and local government support. Now, 1/3 of that $1 trillion was, maybe you could make an argument for, because it was directly related to COVID cases, hospitalizations, and also unemployment levels. But the other 2/3 was simply handed out. So it's as if when Florida gets hit with a hurricane, then Wisconsin gets some money too. That doesn't make sense at all. And so we're not going to bail out states like New York or Kentucky pensions or Connecticut or New Jersey, because that would be a moral hazard. So when we look at COVID relief for states and local governments, first of all, the accountability is not in. We've not seen a full accounting, and we need to make sure that they're making rational decisions. Just throwing money at something is not an answer. As we saw, Governor Pritzker set up a $63 million auxiliary hospital that had less than 3 dozen patients in it. That was a complete waste of money, and I knew that was going to happen from the get-go. There were 2 other auxiliary hospitals the same way. We need a full accounting about how this money is being spent before we provide 1 more cent.
Candidate Redpath.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. What is your stand on providing coronavirus economic support to local and state governments?
Well, I think it has to be very narrowly tailored, and I'm not really for it, because I've seen firsthand, again, some of the waste that occurred with TARP. How do we know this would be any different? How is the money going to be spent? Look, the federal government, we've already covered the horrible national debt situation where, I think today, I believe the CBO came out with a revised figure today. I believe it was something in the ballpark of 2 times the national debt by the year 2050 could be twice the national economic output per year. So it's not like the federal government has money to burn here by any means. I would it'd have to be a darn good reason to do it. And I suspect there aren't too many good reasons to do it, given the very troublesome fiscal situation of the federal government.
Thank you. Sean Casten.
We've got to get more aid to states and municipalities. And when the HEROES Act had 45 mayors, very bipartisan set of mayors who led a letter with me, making sure we got it in. But the details matter. In the CARES Act, we provided funding to states for added costs they had to deal with COVID. When I talked with governors, including our own governor, they said basically that covered about 15% of the hole in their budget. 85% of the hole in state budgets is the decline in revenue. And we did not allow them to use that money to cover revenue shortfalls. So you've now got every state in the country saying the services that I provide as a state, the schools, the hospitals, the food assistance, overseeing the unemployment insurance program, they're going to have to cut those programs, which is going to hurt the least fortunate among us if we don't top up those budgets for them. And so what we did in the HEROES Act was said, we're going to provide additional funding to cover revenue loss. Now, you still have to demonstrate that you had revenue loss to get it. But if we don't, look, if you want to defund the police, don't fund state government, because they're not going to have resources to pay for the police and the fire departments and the schools if we don't fix that. So we've got to do it. We got to put strings on it. I do just want to make a comment about the deficit end of this. Most of the states operate under balanced budget amendments. If they run out of cash and they have to borrow, they will borrow at a much higher interest rate than the federal government has. So the fundamental question is, would we rather our children be saddled with high interest rate debt or low interest rate debt? That's the question. It shouldn't be a difficult answer.
Thank you. Bill Redpath, do you think that LGBTQ community has adequate protections under law and legal precedents? Is more required?
What I see from friends who I know, I generally, yes, I think that the acceptance of gay people in this nation, trans people in this nation has come a long way in the recent past. Is it perfect? No, but I do think that certainly government cannot discriminate in any way, shape, or form. That's for sure. But I think that it is a far better situation than what it was just a few years ago. So, and the Libertarian Party was out front long ago from the get-go of the party in terms of marriage equality, in terms of absolute equality, for that community. So we've come a long way. It's not perfect, but I don't, other than, again, no discrimination should be allowed by government whatsoever. And I think that it's a far better situation than it was. So what more needs to be done at this point? I do not have a response to right now.
Thank you. Sean Casten?
So this is ultimately a legal question, and the challenge we have is that a lot of our Supreme Court justices, I mean, Antonin Scalia famously pursued this originalist line of inquiry that says, if a right is not expressly spelled out in the Constitution or in law, it does not exist. Now, he used that argument to say that women didn't have full equal rights until such time as we ratify the ERA. But that same logic has been used to say that the LGBT community does not have full equal rights under the law, full protection from discrimination, full access under Title IX, unless it is expressly granted by law. Well, you fix that by granting it under law. That's why we passed the Equality Act this year, and I'm frankly rather disappointed that the Senate hasn't taken it up yet. And if you want to know the consequences of not having equal protection under the law, look no forward than the comments that Jeanne Ives made when she was a state rep, when she said that same-sex marriage is a completely disordered relationship of people trying to weasel their way into acceptability. What does that tell you if you are a LGBT youth trying to figure out whether you have equal rights under the law? We owe people decency and respect and equality, and we have to pass that at law.
Thank you. Jeanne Ives?
Oh, listen, Congressman Casten, you know what? We're fortunate to live in America where everybody has equal rights. Well, that's exactly what we have in the Constitution. And you have the equal right to pay higher property taxes like you would like, higher taxes at the federal government. Honestly, I do not have a problem with any of this. The LGBTQ community is well served. Just today, you know, there's teachers in the classroom saying, tell me what your pronouns are. You've never had that before. You have men that can compete on women's sports teams. We've never seen that before. So I would say they're very much accepted. The question is whether or not we're going to protect religious rights at the same time. And HR 5 destroyed religious freedom. It's a mechanism to take away 501(c) status from people who just feel differently than you do. You have the right to do what you want and live your life the way that you want to. Unfortunately, Sean Casten and the Democrats don't want that. They want to impose their value system on the religion and interfere with religious freedom wholesale. That is the problem here more than anything. And my comments that you referenced, by the way, were taken way out of context, and they're very old comments. And I held the same position on redefinition marriage that Barack Obama did as well. We've moved on. Obergefell has happened, and it is the law of the land, and I respect the law of the land. The problem is, it doesn't matter how you identify, you're getting punished by more government and higher taxes under a Sean Casten legislation.
Thank you. Sean Casten, instances of police force against mainly people of color have caused death or injury to many men and women in recent years. The resulting protests have roiled communities across the country. If elected, what would you do to address the issue underlying these problems?
Well, look, we did pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to address some of the issues. And, you know, as I said in my comments about that John Lewis said to us before he passed, we're at least starting to have the conversation. That look that Derek Chauvin had on his face when he was looking into the camera and murdering George Floyd was the look of a man who was pretty confident he was going to get away with it. Bill, I agree with you. We need to get rid of qualified immunity. But we also need to make sure that we need to have a police force to protect us. We need to have someone you call when no one else is available. But we also need to recognize that as long as we have people on the street who have the authority to use deadly coercive force, there has to be accountability. And this is not a new thing in our country. Laquan McDonald happened under Barack Obama. Amadou Diallo, I think, happened under Bill Clinton, if my memory is right. But there have historically been consent decrees with the attorney generals, finding out which police forces had managerial problems that needed to be addressed, making sure that those police forces have new training, have new managerial systems. Maybe that means an increase in resources. There hasn't been a single consent decree issued under the Trump administration. And that's not because things have gotten better. But I hope that now that we're at least talking about it and acknowledging it, we can start addressing those root causes.
Thank you. Jeanne Ives?
It's pretty frightful out there. When you look across the nation, you see what's happened in Seattle and Portland, Kenosha, and elsewhere in our own streets of Chicago. It's very unsettling to people. Businesses are afraid to open up. People are afraid to go down and visit Chicago at this point, and that is not right. Look, the rule of law, again, like I said, is preeminent in solving this issue. If you're not going to enforce the laws, then the lawlessness will continue. So this is incumbent upon state and local governments to do the best thing. I support the Tim Scott Policing and Reform Act. I think that was a good measure. Unfortunately, when given the opportunity to condemn the defund the police movement, every single Democrat in Congress refused to do that. We need to condemn that. We need police there. We need them out there doing their jobs. They need to be respected. And we need our leaders to have a sense of civility and a sense of, you know what, we're not going to take it anymore. We'll stand right in front of that store. And if you're going to throw a brick, you're throwing it at me first. That's the level of consideration we have to have for our shop owners, our individuals on our streets. We have to take back our streets, and we do it with our local police force enforcing the law. Lancaster, PA, great example. They had riots erupt too after a similar incident. And immediately they gathered up those rioters, put them in jail, and put $1 million bail bond on them. That's how you answer this question. There was no more riots after that. When you take action, you enforce the law, it stops.
Thank you. Bill Redpath.
Well, I spoke to this earlier, qualified immunity. We need that to be reformed or done away with. Again, say again, the war on drugs has absolutely fueled violence in this society for decades. At the end of alcohol prohibition, or I should say federal alcohol prohibition in 1933, the per capita murder rate in this nation went down for 11 consecutive years. The same thing would happen again with the end of the war on drugs. And that is the one thing, more than any sort of gun control legislation or anything else, that is the one thing that would make the streets in this nation far safer for sure. And again, occupational licensing. We have to allow people to earn a living, stop making it so burdensome to become a hair braider or to go into many occupations that a couple decades ago did not require a license. That is a barrier to people, to poor people, and particularly minorities in this nation. Now, the rioting is absolutely reprehensible. Peaceful protests are a constitutional right and certainly something to be applauded in many instances, but any sort of violence, destruction of property, harming or injuring other people, killing them, there's been way too much of that. And it's absolutely reprehensible and it needs to stop. But there are again, ending qualified immunity, end the war on drugs, and ease up on occupational licensing and reverse that in so many ways. That's what we should do.
Thank you. So we're going to try again. It's closing statement time. And starting with Jeanne Ives, closing statement, 2 minutes.
First of all, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this informative forum. I have participated in your forums ever since I first ran for office in 2009 on Wheaton City Council. So I appreciate the efforts you put into this. And I also want to recognize the fact that it is the 100-year anniversary of the Women's Voting Rights Act. So that is a great deal. But I want to remind people that the 2020 election will decide the direction of our nation for decades to come. The choice is simple. Again, do you want more freedom in your life or more government? I served for 6 years as a state legislator in Springfield. I know just how much power elected officials have. I have seen the enormous influence special interests, lobbyists, and party leaders have. That's why I understand the importance of having someone in office who is truly an advocate for the common man and woman. I want my children and their generations to know the blessings of liberty and to have opportunities for that my generation had. These opportunities come from preserving our free enterprise system and our constitutional rights, not from an ever-increasing government. I've always stood on the side of more freedom. I have a deep confidence in the people of the 6th District to make better decisions for their families, businesses, and communities than Sean Casten can. I have a long track record as a state legislator of standing up for my constituents and against overburdensome government control. Whether the issue was taxes, unnecessary regulations, government transparency, or corruption, I stood with my district, and I'll do the same in Congress. I'm Jeanne Ives. I'm asking for your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bill Redpath, your closing statement.
I want to thank everyone who attended this forum, and I thank the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellyn for including me. I do know there are other forums from which I have been excluded. I'm sometimes asked, why are you running for an office? You're such a long shot to win. I'm running for this office in 2020 because elections in this nation should be about more than electoral horse races and having to choose between the lesser of two evils. And with the exception of statewide offices, that is almost always all you have to choose from in Illinois. Reason magazine ranked the ballot access laws of Illinois second among all states in the difficulty faced by third-party and independent candidates to get on the ballot. It would normally take the signatures of 16,000 registered voters in my highly gerrymandered congressional district to get on the ballot. Because the shelter-in-place order made petitioning in public impossible for much of the petitioning period this year, a federal judge lowered the required number of signatures to a reasonable number, something the state legislature and governor refused to do, and I was able to get on the ballot. Rather than trying to exclude non-democratic, non-Republican candidates from the ballot, Illinois should make ballot access far easier and adopt ranked choice voting. With that, voters rank their candidates in order of preference. If your first choice candidate doesn't win, you can then help your second or perhaps third choice candidate get elected. Ranked choice voting can be used in single winner elections, but legislative elections don't have to be run as single winner elections. We can have legislatures elected through multi-member districts using ranked choice voting, which is a form of proportional representation. Voters would have more choice, far more choice than they have now. In each multi-member district, you'd have several candidates from more than two parties and independent candidates who would clearly have to state what they are for. Simply saying, vote for me because I'm not the other candidate wouldn't cut it anymore. You can see online how ranked choice voting works. I'm Bill Redpath, Libertarian for U.S. House. My website is billredpath.com. And if you live in Illinois' 6th Congressional District, I respectfully ask for your vote. Thank you.
John Casten, your closing statement, please.
Solving climate change matters. Access to healthcare matters. Insisting on our shared equality matters. Reagan's city on a hill that welcomes the best and brightest to our shores matters. Making life a little bit better for people matters. That is the power and the responsibility that comes with being just one of 536 Americans to hold a federally elected office. Donald Trump doesn't get that. He risked the future of our planet when he walked away from the Paris Climate Accord, destabilized the Middle East when he pulled out of the JCPOA, put your healthcare at risk by destabilizing the Affordable Care Act, and made our streets and schools less safe with his embrace of white nationalism and the NRA. Leaders without empathy or respect for science cost lives. 200,000 Americans from COVID as of this morning. On my morning jogs in Washington, I'd like to stop at the Lincoln Memorial to read his second inaugural. With malice towards none and charity for all is his vision of the future, but his description of the present is a world where one party would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than allow it to perish. It hits a little too close to home right now. We need wisdom, kindness, and the moral backbone to stand up to those who would make war in this moment. My opponent's outspoken racism, homophobia, and love for Donald Trump are not that. But as Ruth Bader Ginsburg once said, so often in life, things you regard as an impediment turn out to be great good fortune. In the last 4 years, we've seen the largest peaceful protests in our nation's history. We saw a surge in civic engagement that led to the most diverse Congress ever. We've seen the American spirit awakened as people realize their collective responsibility to protect our Constitution and our democracy. Trump is an impediment, but it's our great good fortune to be reminded of that American spirit. And that's what's going to save us in November, because indeed it's the only thing that ever has. Thank you.
Thank you. Our time is up for this forum. For further election information, please go to the IllinoisVoterGuide.org, which is powered by the League of Women Voters of Illinois. It is 100% nonpartisan election information you need. A link to this recording will be located on each of the 10 sponsoring Leagues of Women Voters websites and/or Facebook pages. Go to your local area league website for more information. We appreciate your participation, whether you are a candidate or a voter. It is essential to preserving our freedom and our country. Please remember to vote, whether it is via vote by mail, early voting, or on Election Day. Thank you.